Hey everyone, welcome to episode 33 now of the BritHick with myself, Connor, and Aaron as always. And Aaron, do you want to explain what we're going to be talking about this week? Because I think I'm going to fumble it.
Yeah, no worries. So last weekend was the Monaco Grand Prix, and if anyone who's been listening to the podcast for a little while knows that I'm a motorsport fan and have been longer than I've been listening to music. And one of the discussions that's been had over the last number of years, Monaco Grand Prix didn't happen last year, and I feel like that this is what's kind of brought it up again. Is that if the Monaco Grand Prix didn't have the history outside of the race itself, in regards to the glitz and the glamour of Monaco, and that it's been going since 1929, is that essentially the standard of the racing itself isn't of a high enough standard with the modern cars to merit it still having a race, and the only reason that it's there is because of the tradition of having the race there. And this made me think of something that we could just discuss today, is what kind of things are people holding on to more for tradition over, say, practicality. So yeah, and in regards to the Monaco Grand Prix, I kind of am in two minds about it. I'd understand why it would go, but at the same time, it's so different to the other races that I quite like it being there, even if it's a bit of a procession because it's difficult for the cars to overtake, just because it's so narrow. But yeah, I was just thinking about a wider scope of the kind of things that people think of, maybe not fondly in days gone by, but that maybe with modern technology or the way that things have changed in the last few decades, make it so that there's an easier option out there. And I know that you said earlier in the week tube amps was one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, obviously that's something we have got experience with and an opinion on, like a very hands-on opinion. And it's quite a hot debate still amongst guitar players. And I don't know, so, like, some people get really upset by that. Not like, oh, but it's just unacceptable that you would use anything other than tubes. But if you look at if you're focusing purely on the practicality of it, like, this isn't anything to do with the sounds or, you know, that the sonic kind of palette you get from tube versus solid state versus modelling, whatever. Now more so than ever, musicians are, I'd say, more inclined or more required to have a more portable rig. Logistically speaking, more people playing smaller shows. Like, transport is an issue. Like, moving big amplifiers around. Living conditions for a lot of people mean you can't have a huge amp in your house for space and volume, because no one wants to be that wanker running a JCM 800 at full bolt when you've got neighbours.
Yeah.
Well, some people do want to be that wanker, but you're a wanker. There's that. There's the upkeep of a tube amp. They need repairing. They need regular servicing. And then also, in terms of tubes themselves, I think it's two, potentially three maximum factories left on the planet that actually still manufacture tubes.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's one of those things. Tube amps are fragile. They're more prone to breaking than a lot of solid state stuff. And the reason, if people don't know, the reason why tube amplifiers are tubes is because it's a technology that predates transistors, and any kind of audio equipment required tubes or valves, I think it's valves in the UK and tubes in America, but it's kind of they're the same thing.
Yeah.
It was required for anything. Like, if you wanted a radio, it would have a valve transistor in it or a tube. And then now, as technology's moved on and everything's moved to solid state transistors in regards to consumer electronics, outside of really high end boutique hi-fi and guitar amps, that's the only places that are still requiring tubes, as far as I'm aware. There might be some other specialist pieces of equipment, but on the mass market, as far as I can tell, that's the only two that still require them. And it's a technology that is only being held up by those. There's nothing new that's coming out of that now. And the argument is always the same, is that it sounds better or it feels better. And in regards to feeling better, I kind of can see where they're coming from, because having a valve amp cranked really loud, there is something about it. But that's the only time, is you have to have it cranked really loud to do anything. You can't have it half cocked.
Yeah. And the people will argue, oh, what about using a clean amp as a pedal platform? That's a different kettle of fish, and it's not something I'm going to go into because it's going to turn into like a guitar podcast. But yeah, if you want to get the most, like, objectively speaking, out of most tube amps, if you're playing rock or metal or any genre that requires some kind of gain, like if you want that from the amp, you do need to smash it pretty hard. They're not ear friendly in a domestic setting or any outside of a rehearsal room, really.
Yeah.
And and then you can, I can get an attenuator, and it's like, that's another few £100, like, on top of easily like $1,000 for a decent tube. Well, I'll say $1,000. You can get a good tube amp for less than that, but let's just say that as a ballpark figure. So you're looking at a few £100 on top of that for an attenuator, just to use something at home at a reasonable volume. And yeah, I think there are certain sounds and certain sounds typical to certain kinds of music which they may fare better in. But I mean, from our domain, like high gain metal, I remember I've read that article, and I sent you it previously. That guy was basically saying how solid state is better for high gain metal, because the practice of it's a long article, but summing it down into two main points. He's like, very rarely does anyone run their tube amp loud enough to get power amp distortion.
Yeah.
Because that is really giving it the beans. And if you're running an overdrive in front of a valve amp, you're using solid state distortion anyway. Like, you're using a solid state in that channel. And the response time and like the attack of a solid state is faster and, like, you could say tighter. It's just a bit of a layman's term, but
there's no sag.
Exactly. And when you're playing like thrash, for example, or like a tight death metal, you don't want sag.
Yeah. And that's what kind of swayed the way for me, was when I was playing flip-flopping between like tube heads and solid state stuff, was the fact that the sound itself was fine when you were doing, like, the tone itself was fine. However, I was still having to add stuff beforehand to make it the tight attack that I wanted, rather than it. I don't know, the best way to describe it is like tube amps kind of go wow when you hit something, whereas you want it to be like dun 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 dun. Like, you would need that initial like hit, And you're doing that with something like a Tube Screamer or like a Super Overdrive with like minimal gain, which is what I was doing. But if you go solid state, then it's gonna help. And we're not saying like digital modelers or anything. Like, we're just saying solid state as well. Like, it comes under all of that. So for the stuff that we play live, our rigs are analog, quote unquote, solid state preamps going into D class power amps.
Yes. MOSFET preamp.
Yeah, into Seymour Duncan power stages, which I believe are D class power amps. And if you look at the schematics of the preamps that we're using, they are modelled off of tube amps, except the tubes are replaced with transistors, JFET and MOSFET transistors. And sound-wise, I think they're perfectly fine.
They sound great. It's AMT, the brand we use, if anyone's at all interested. They're a Russian brand. But yeah, when I was playing mine at home a while back, Sam Thompson was round. And he was like, he commented on how close to like a tube sound it was.
Yeah.
And he's owns like all of the big high gain heads, like Zeller 5150, I'm pretty sure. Couple of different PVs like the JSX, Triple X. He's had loads of different high gain heads, but yeah, he was really impressed by it.
Yeah. The one thing that I was thinking of, and I remember this like in bands before ours, there was this thing of, and I don't know if it was a general consensus thing, but I definitely heard more than one person say it, was that if you were in a band, one person was using a tube amp and one person was using a solid state, the solid state would always get drowned out by the tube. And I don't know if that's a resonance thing or it's because a lot of people in the UK use Marshalls in regards to tube heads, because Marshall has a very distinctive cutting sound live.
Very pushed mids.
And I feel like that even that going against another brand's guitar amp might have trouble, like another tube head.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of a band that will have had a Marshall on one side and like a Mesa or a PV on the other, and I can't really think of one at the moment.
No, I'm struggling to think of. That's the thing now. So many, I'd say for the last 20 years or so, most bands with two guitarists seem to run very similar rigs.
Which is odd, because in my mind, you shouldn't do that. And we've had this discussion before with our personal takes on things. I know that we've just said we run the same brand of preamps, but they're different preamps.
Yeah.
And your sound is tailored more to high mids and mine's tailored more to low mids, so that we're not taking up the same space.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's just people are using the same gear but then EQing it differently, I don't know. But the one thing I was going to say as well is I can't think of a new tube amp that's come out that isn't something based on something else. So take like Bugera out of it. I can't think, and Hughes and Kettner did a couple things as well, but I'm trying to think of any other brands of amps that have done something new with tube amps that isn't like a lunchbox head.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can really think of, it isn't really even I might be wildly wrong here, someone will be like, oh, you're an idiot, but it's not so much different in the approach to the amp itself in terms of the power amp and a preamp and stuff, but I'm seeing more modern tube heads introduced with things like built-in like two notes and things like that, which is awesome. That's really good. but fundamentally the amp is still functioning in the same way. But it's good to have that makes it more flexible in a home recording and like live environment when you've got like a sim out and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, the meat and potatoes of how the power amp and the preamp work is not changed, has it?
Yeah. I haven't seen anything like new. I haven't seen any like new amps, like new types of amps, like new flavors of distortion or anything. It's always seemed to be the same kind of thing. I guess Victory started out, but then they're hitting that British kind of thing, but slightly different.
Yeah.
And then Peavy did the Invective, which I guess is what you're saying about, but that was in collaboration. That was like a signature model amp.
Yeah, for Misha.
Yeah. So it's kind of difficult to work out. What I will say though is, especially in regards to recording, where I feel like a tube amp is needed, is that kind of half gain.
Yeah.
That in between sound. So not balls to the wall, massive overdrive and distortion, and not clean. That kind of half cocked Stevie Ray Vaughan,
Like breakup.
Joey Bonamassa breakup kind of sound, I still think is very difficult to get captured right.
Yeah.
I mean, the only one that I've heard that I'm like, yeah, that's pretty fucking good is the Corey Wong plugin, which is why I bought it.
Yeah, that is really impressive. Like, it's a very good bit of software.
Yeah. But I think it's one of those things as well where people now, I guess our age and younger, because of the way that music's changed, we can't really afford... This is another thing to do with tradition, I think, is that the concept of recording everything at a studio and spending days and days and days in a studio. And I feel like that concept, that's not practical anymore because the money isn't there to do that. And it's sad because obviously we want to see studios carry on working. And I do think that a lot of them have closed down because of this kind of shift. But with the way that things have become more accessible and the knowledge is out there more, home recording for the majority of instrumentation is just more practical. Barring... I always feel like the things that give away a recording is like poorly produced drums and poorly produced vocals.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Obviously, software drums can be a love-hate thing. But I would argue especially in a lot of modern metal, like the post-editing and the sample layer and that goes on with drums anyway, it's like, well, you're not even going to notice the difference. Which is something I don't like personally. Is I want to hear I want to hear the sound of the kit and I want to hear the sound of the drummer. I like sample like what do you call it? Not like hit replacement, but
it's like beat replacement.
Yeah, so I don't like this. That's a bit pointless to me. It's like, well, why have you bothered recording a kit? But if you're using it to like complement the recorded
sound reinforcement,
that's it. Yeah, that's fine. I understand that. There's the trend of production has made that a thing where it's like kind of like it's kind of a necessary evil, if you want to say. That's a bit of a strong term, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're home recording, unless you're very lucky and you've got the right space, you can't really record drums anyway. And if you do, it's not going to be the ideal environment to capture that sound. And same for vocals as well. You need you can record vocals in your house, but it's not going to sound. The room is going to be the make or break factor in that.
Yeah, and I feel like musicians now or as I should say, like kind of up and coming musicians, be it singer songwriters or rock and metal bands, need to be more savvy with their money in regards to time.
Yes.
And me personally, I feel like if you have the knowledge and ability to record DI to a decent level and get it to the whoever you've decided to mix it in a proper manner. There's a good video by Glenn Fricker on the do's and don'ts of home recording in regards to when you send stuff off to a mix engineer, which is really helpful because there was some things in there that I didn't even think of, like because I would name all of my tracks, so it'd be like kick, snare, like tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, overhead left, overhead right. And he was like, well, that doesn't help because everything's going to be put in alphabetical order. So what he said is you need to do it so that it's 00, 01, 02, 03, and then the name. So
Nice.
that when the mix engineer gets it, it's in order of the tracks as you intend them to be. And that's something that I had never thought of before. There were some things in there that I had that I have done before. But just getting yourself up to snuff just enough so that you can send the DI tracks to someone, I think is enough. And then you spend your time in the studio doing the things that you can't do at home. So acoustic drums, vocals, and then the mixing. Which is going to save you, I don't know, what, 50% of your time?
Yeah.
For doing guitar or like doing other instrumentation. So yeah, that's one thing for me, is that kind of, and I've fallen for it before where I'm just like, oh, it doesn't feel right unless you do it all at a studio. Like the album that we just did was all at the studio.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to do it, and I don't regret doing it. However, this time it was one of those things where it's like, okay, cool, we'll do the same amount of time in the studio, except we're just going to do half of it and spend way longer doing that half so that we get like hopefully a better product.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just trying to think of like things outside of music in regards to like tradition.
I mean, it's not exactly, it's a bit of a square peg in a round hole in terms of the discussion we're having, because obviously the long-term aim is for this to become the norm, but obviously the transition to electric car from petrol car.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of resistance against that from kind of some people, like, oh, it's not the same, like it won't feel the same. It's like there's kind of a bigger picture here, which is a bit more important.
Yeah, and this is coming from a motorsport fan, and it's funny because like I commented on a video on YouTube the other day, and this is my way of thinking about it, and I think I've lifted it from someone else, but I'm not sure. And this is to do with electronic motorsport taking over from petrol motorsport. We all know that petrol cars are going to be gone on a consumer standpoint in the next 20 years in general. Like they'll stop being produced. So car manufacturers are having to focus on doing electric, or if there's another technology down the line, maybe, I don't know. However, in regards to motorsport, I feel like it's going to be the same way that it was like with horse racing. Is that horses were a method of transport that were made obsolete by the car, but there is still quite an avid fan base for horse racing, and there is a lot of horse racing. I feel like that although petrol cars are going to be gone on a consumer level, in regards to high-end performance speed, it's going to be longer than 20 years before electric can take over petrol.
Yeah.
So there's still going to be petrol-based or predominantly hybrid-based motorsport until the point that electric becomes faster. So I think it's still going to be a while before electric motorsport will make petrol motorsport or hybrid motorsport completely obsolete. Because you're not going to get, barring some crazy battery technology that comes out between now and 2040, you're not going to get a car that can go 230 miles an hour around a 2-mile oval for 200 laps. It's not going to be possible.
Just saying, mate. Scale Electric's done it.
So because there's no regeneration, like the reason that Formula E is at city tracks at the moment is because there's a lot of stop-start. There's no flowing long sections like there is in Formula 1 at the moment, because of the fact that the electronic cars require the regeneration to get to the end of the race because the batteries aren't powerful enough yet.
Yeah.
And those races are only 45 minutes. So if you start looking at like endurance racing, so that's your 4, 6, 12, 24-hour races, they're not there, and I don't think they will be. But in regards to like cars for us, for people going to work and like just traveling, yeah, there is no point in delaying the inevitable. Like, it was like people decrying fuel injection when all cars had carburetors. It's a change. It's just, that's the way that it's going to be, and it's up to those people to keep the cars that they have going. If they're passionate about it and they are car people, like I know people, someone I know's just imported a car from America, like an old muscle car that they want to do up.
Yeah.
It's up to those people to keep those cars going. So rather than pissing and moaning, it's a case of, well, do something, be mechanical, and keep the petrol cars that you want going. But yeah, I mean, it's the fact that people complain about the fact that electric cars are coming in the next 20 years is just a bit backwards for me, and that's coming from a person that I really like cars, and in particular I like big V8s that are like the least economical cars going. So poignant for me anyway, because of the last year, is up until the pandemic, the fact that companies were so hesitant to have people working from home.
Yeah.
Because there was a big thing about the fact that disabled people had been campaigning for years and years and years to be able to work from home, and the companies were replying with, "Oh, the infrastructure's not in place. We don't trust you. We don't think that you're like, our studies show that the output of people working from home isn't as high as people that are in the office, blah, blah, blah." And then, lo and behold, beginning of 2020, lockdown comes in. Everyone has to migrate. And because I was basically on the front lines for this, because of doing IT support as a job, all of our clients going to work from home, switching everything to remote working, yada, yada, yada. Like within 2-3 weeks, most companies were up and running, and they all survived. I don't think there was any particular fallout from it. Maybe a couple bits of infrastructure because of software that wasn't designed to be used remotely. But I'm not going back to the office 5 days a week, and there are a few of my clients that aren't going back to the office 5 days a week. Friends of mine the leases have lapsed on the offices where they were working, and they haven't been replenished because they're not going back to the office anymore. And I feel like things like that can only happen when the status quo is rocked, which is a shame because, like I said, people had been campaigning for an allowance or for disabled people or people that can't make it to the office for various personal reasons to be able to work from home for a long period of time. And the companies were just like, no, this is the way it has to be because of whatever reason we decide to pull out of our ass.
Yeah.
And it was only because of the threat of the company folding that it's actually changed. But again, is that tradition or is that just stagnation with the fact that everyone was so used to commuting and going into work every day when the technology had developed to a point where you could do it from home, but no one wanted to admit that that was the case anymore. And then it took a shake of the tree for people to realise that that was actually the case.
I think I'd argue it's a bit of both. And I know that sounds like hedging your bets a bit, but in terms of tradition, like that argument, I'd say, yeah, partially that, because even though it's a weird thing to think, it's a weird domain to think of there being traditions. I think some people do still have like, and I mean this is a detriment, really. I think some people still do have this like cast iron notion. It's like, no, work's got to be Monday to Friday. It's got to be one of these kind of jobs. Otherwise, it's not a proper job. You know, like the amount of people in actual proper careers, but to other people, their work seems like it's not important because it's not your typical Monday to Friday. You're not in an office, all this stuff.
Yeah.
Said as someone who works Monday to Friday in an office. There's nothing right or wrong with any of it. Do you know what I mean? It's some people don't want to do that, and they prefer the flexibility of different hours or careers that don't revolve around that. So I think there's still a lot of tradition tied to like the hierarchy of like jobs, and that's a really rubbish phrase, but the way that people perceive the importance of certain careers and things like that. And then, stagnation, I'd say. Everyone's like, well, this is the way we've always done it, so don't change it.
Yeah.
And I say it ain't broke, don't fix it, but what it really is it isn't broke for you, so you don't want to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that was broken for a demographic of people.
Yeah.
But because the people that were more senior, it wasn't broken from them, so they don't want to deal with it and the potential fallout from it. And
you think fundamentally it's a progressive idea, which is probably why it was stifled for so long.
Yeah, I'd say so. The thing is, as well, is that like if it was done at a point where it wasn't everyone is gone, I do feel like that maybe some people that are potentially more work shy would exploit it. Whereas in a situation where everyone is gone, because everyone's gone, you can see the level of work. So the people that maybe were thinking, oh, well, I can just sit at home and not do anything, you're going to see their output tail off.
Right, yeah, I mean, I definitely noticed a bit of that when we all started working from home, like at my job. But that's the irony, because you're all in the same boat, it's pretty much like grassing yourself up, because it becomes very apparent who isn't picking up their bit of the slack.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I think that's an element of human nature to a degree. Like some people will take advantage of a convenience and kind of abuse that.
Yeah.
But then equally, to the other end of that, I know a lot of people are overworking themselves because they couldn't get the work and life separation because it was in their home.
Yeah.
And it's you know, and I also, you know, the situation everyone was in, there's a lot of uncertainty, like, oh, is my job safe, like depending on what field you were in and stuff. So I think people were so worried, it was kind of like, I'm just going to overwork myself and show that like I deserve to be here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
if this was me 5 years ago, I'd be in that boat.
Yeah.
It's only in the last 5 years of kind of coming to terms with the fact that in my own headspace that I am doing a decent amount, that I'm happy to do my shifts and, well, not my shifts, but do my work.
Yeah.
Pick up what I need, but not run myself ragged or stress myself out because maybe there isn't something that I could do. Yeah, if this had happened 5 years ago in a previous job, I would be like all over the shop.
Yeah, so like, and I think, I mean, there were definitely like, I've seen accounts of like, unfortunately, like businesses that did take advantage of that. But then, not that it makes it all right. Like, oh, they would have just done it anyway. It strikes me that they would have done that in the workplace as well.
Yeah, if they found a way to exploit this situation, then they were probably exploiting other situations as well.
Yeah.
To try and make people work longer hours for no pay or whatever else. But yeah, and in regards to your hierarchy of jobs, it's one of those things, isn't it, where we're talking about, I don't know if we were talking about it on here or just like off the podcast, but the whole clap for the NHS thing, I think we've spoken about before, where people were doing it but not actually thinking about the importance of the actual jobs.
Yeah.
Because we've said about the fact that there still hasn't been a pay rise. And then the response is kind of a shrug of the shoulders and oh, well. It's like, well, what was all the clapping for? And it's like, oh, it showed that we support them. It's like, well, you support them by giving them more fucking money because they deserve it. But that's kind of off on off on a bit of a tangent. But yeah, it is that thing of, I think it's a hangover from the 80s, to be honest, is that city slicker, yuppie, working 9 to 5, suited and booted, in on the train work. It's the kind of people that I used to serve when I was doing bar management. And they were, I don't want to say that they were like all work shy, but there's definitely a fair whack of them that were in the pub by 12:30 and weren't leaving until 4, and then back in the pub at 5:30. So and people hold those people in a higher regard than nurses and doctors that are having to do like double back shifts and all that stuff, which just in my mind doesn't sit right. That a 40-year-old guy in a suit selling insurance is held in a higher regard and is paid more money than, I don't know, a 40-year-old nurse that's been doing it for 20 years and is probably mentally and physically absolutely shagged from the amount of work and stuff that they've had to experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound like a very fucking feed the world statement, and I know it's not an ideal world, but you'd see how quickly things would change if people were paid according to the value they put into society rather than like the value they put into their company's net profits.
Yeah. Which is it's unfortunate that it doesn't work that way, but we all know that it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
but yeah, when it was always that thing of when you've got people working 45, 50 hours a week, queuing up for food banks and stuff, like something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And the general kind of nonchalance towards it is kind of depressing.
Yeah, and there's always a strange, like, well, it's not strange, it's kind of, it's almost a masochistic kind of competition to work. Like, well, I worked more hours this week. Like, oh, you say you've got this hard job because you work 40 hours, or I do, like, I don't mean like people with nurses and stuff are saying this. It's very much like a business mindset, and it's kind of like this like quote unquote hustler mindset that seems to have like swept across bits of the internet, and it's like, okay, cool. It's all well and good saying that if you're grafting and pursuing something that is your dream, but if you're not, it's like that's time you're never going to get back.
Yeah, it's one thing to say, oh, I was working 55 hours this week on my company of the idea that I had.
Yeah.
Compared to, oh, I worked 55 hours at Subway.
Yeah. And that's like, not to obviously we're not shitting on people who work at Subway and stuff like that.
But it's that mindset of do more, do more, do more, do more. And it's like, well, yes, if it's your passion project. No, if it's just work for like another company. Like that's not.
And that's
you're gonna do yourself a mischief.
Yeah, and that's the danger of that mindset. It's like quite toxic, and because that really plays into the hands of like some unscrupulous employers and stuff. Because like you take advantage of that, and it's like, oh yeah, no, I should want to do more and like and give all my time to this job, you know. And
yes, that's why I got out of hospitality.
Yeah,
because it's always that
you just don't have you do not like have a life when you work in hospitality. Really, like I've worked in hospitality as well. It's just like you work all the unsociable hours, and yeah, it's just fucking. It can be fun, but yeah, there's not much room for yourself.
No, and there was definitely a lot of occasions where I had booked time off. So I was like, I'm going to do this shift because I want to do this. And I would say that probably 95% of the time it would get to where I was due to leave. And then, so I managed a bar, but then the manager of the whole building would be like, oh, it's getting busy, you're going to have to stay. It's like, what? It's like, well, it's getting busy. I was like, well, I could just get someone else to come in. It's like, no, you got to stay. And it's like, all right. And because I was on a salary, I wasn't getting paid any extra.
Yeah,
which is the actual reason, because they want to level the books. And I don't think that it was that person being particularly malevolent. I just think that he was fully on board. Like, he was a bar manager, his partner was a bar manager, his friends were bar managers. It was like fully in that bubble of that's how you do it. And that it was like after the third gig that I had tickets for that I missed because I'd booked time off to go to a gig, and then I wasn't able to go. And then I had a job interview and I couldn't go to that either because it got busy. I was like, but it's a job interview for something else. It's like, well, if you go to that job interview, you don't have a job here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, which they're not allowed to do, but I didn't know that until after the fact. But that's when I kind of went, yeah, I'm done with this now.
Yeah.
And obviously, your listeners' experiences may vary. I'm just speaking from my own personal experience of it. But yeah, that whole hustler putting in the out is like do the work to get the money at the end. Is like, but a lot of the time that's not the case.
Yeah,
it's not how that works. Unfortunately, we wish it would be that way, but yeah, I'm just trying to think of like other. I was going to go on a bit of a rant about patriotism in regards to like bygone areas of like imperial conquest.
Oh,
But,
I think that's a whole episode in itself, really.
Yeah, I know. I don't really want to
Put that one in the bank.
Yeah, I don't want to shake the hornet's nest on that one because we'll be sat here for fucking hours doing it. There is a bit of a, and I'm susceptible to it, and like I'll hold my hands up. Is especially in London, like the post-work going for drinks.
Yeah.
And obviously that alienates a lot of people that don't drink. Like, and obviously they can go out and like have a non-alcoholic drink and everything. But there is always that conversation of, oh, go on, you can have a beer. I was like, no, I can't have a beer. What are you, some kind of pansy or something? And it's all like I've seen it happen so many times, like from being behind the bar. And definitely in my early 20s, I know that I've said that to people before. It's like, oh, go on, you can have a beer. You can just one beer. And it's never just one beer with stuff like that. And I think that potentially that mindset kind of needs to change. Obviously, none of that stuff's happened in like since March last year, but
yeah, I was about to say I've forgotten that was even a thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not to a level like these work things are not to the level of like Japan, for example, because like I mean, Japan have the term karoshi, which is like to work yourself to death. Like, they actually have a term for it, and the whole salaryman thing where they're literally working, then go out, get absolutely blasted, and then go back into the work the next day. But then sometimes they're like working throughout the night entirely and are in their same clothes the next day.
Yeah.
And that I feel like that. Obviously, I can't really say anything about it because I'm not from Japan and I've never visited Japan. But I do kind of hope for their sakes that mindset changes, because they do seem to be so focused on personal achievement in regards to impress like their peers, that the population is decreasing because no one has time to have a family.
Yeah, there was a really good like documentary. I think it was either BBC or Channel 4, I can't remember. It was Sue Perkins in Japan.
Right, yeah.
Which sounds really random, but yeah, the episode, I think it was like 3 episodes on different aspects of like the culture. And like how it, you know, the difference, the contrast between like Western culture and like Japanese culture. And the episode that I saw was about like the work culture and that literally like that work yourself to death thing. And there's a big segment of it, and it was about there's a real issue with like the population is falling because people just don't have the time to have like relationships and stuff like that. And there was like this speed dating thing for like business people. And,
right. Okay.
It's like, you know, fairly young men and women, so like maybe like late 20s, early 30s, which is still pretty young, really.
Yeah.
And they just don't know how to talk to each other at all. And I don't mean that in a snarky way or like a shitty way, but they've just got no social experience with like the opposite sex because all they do is work.
Yeah.
And they're almost like, it's almost like watching, you know, when you see school children like nervous about talking to each other, it's kind of like that. And it's like, wow, it's really, and again, I don't mean it's in a condescending way. So it's really sad because they're just they're just like, yeah, I've never had the time to speak to like women and or vice versa. I never have time to speak to like men I might be interested in speaking to. It's like, it's always about work and it's fucking crazy.
So all consuming that they just don't have anything.
Yeah. And it's
which
such
is just mad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to talk in quite broad strokes here because obviously, again, like Aaron, I'm not from Japan. I've never been to Japan. But a lot of, you know, when you look into it, it's like a lot of there's a lot of societal pressure, like within a lot of Japanese culture, and there's an expectation. Like you say, there's almost a conformity, like you have to do this.
Yeah.
And which is, I think, something we discussed before when we were talking about the visual kaibans and stuff like that. It's like that's why that imagery is so kind of extreme because it's such a rigid thing to like kick out against.
Yeah, and that is why it's usually that whole thing with the people like that is usually that they're not dropouts, but not people that are so academically inclined.
Yeah.
But can get away with good looks. Which is why, like, this is why agencies pick them up, like visual, like that whole, like, I don't know if we've gone fully into the whole like agency thing because part of that as well is that quite a lot of them are also escorts in like the smaller bands, and they're managed by the same people. And I don't think it's like full prostitution, but they're like go on a date situate, like get paid to take this woman out on a date kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that happens with like the female idols as much, but I definitely know that it happens with like the male parts of it that are either modeling or in these visual bands. Because that, like, the female idols are usually really young, so I don't know if they're actually going to be old enough to do it.
Yeah,
because they're
normally
like, they're normally like 14 to 18.
Yeah,
for the idol stuff, which is I could be like, oh, it's just a Japanese thing, but then I was like, but then did like the whole Disney kids. Well, what was it called? Like the thing that like Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera came out of, the whole Disney thing.
Oh, Mickey Mouse Club.
Yeah, because that was just like a pop star factory, and it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that is a kind of conscious kick out against the conformity of working yourself to death, essentially. But yeah, like, I can't think of many, like, off the top of my head. I'm sure that people realise that we don't script these because we're just there like, oh yeah, what other things can we talk about? But yeah, like, I guess we can kind of wrap it up there, really, rather than trying to scratch our heads for something else.
Yeah.
I hope people enjoyed us chatting random bollocks for another hour this week. Hopefully we'll be back on board for next week. I am redoing my studio, but that should be all up and running by this time next week, hopefully.
We're going to run all of our podcasts through Lexicon Reverb.
I might just turn it on for like a part of the next one just to see what it sounds like, just for the crack. But
we've gone post-punk.
post punk cast. But yeah, I hope everyone had a good bank holiday weekend. I hope the weather wasn't shit. And we will see you all next week.
Bye for now.